Samantha and Mark seemed like two people from different worlds. She a schoolgirl full of innocence, he her father's trusted best friend, but their secret affair would ignite a deadly chain of events that ended in a brutal murder no one saw coming. Samantha was only 17 when everything began to unravel, but no one around her saw the cracks forming. On the surface, she was like any other schoolgirl, going to classes, scrolling endlessly through her phone, and trying to find her place in the world. Her father trusted her and rarely questioned her choices. Her mother worried, as mothers do, but she assumed Samantha's quiet moods and shifting behaviors were just the normal struggles of a teenager. What none of them saw was the secret Samantha was already hiding, one that involved a man they knew and trusted more than most. Her father's best friend Mark had been part of their lives for years. He was at birthdays, at barbecues, and at family gatherings. He had always been the reliable one, the man who helped with repairs around the house, who shared beers with Samantha's father late into the night, and who carried an air of maturity and confidence that teenagers sometimes find magnetic. To everyone else, he was harmless, dependable, a man with a solid career and a seemingly steady life. But behind the easy smile and polite manners was someone far more complicated, and Samantha was the one who stumbled into that darker side. It began innocently enough, at least in her mind. She noticed him watching her a little longer than necessary. She caught herself thinking about him when she shouldn't. When he complimented her in passing, the words lingered with a weight that was hard to ignore. The attention made her feel seen, even special, in a way she hadn't experienced before. In a household where her father was often distracted by work and her mother was busy with chores and errands, Mark's interest felt like an escape. He was older, more confident, and he carried himself in a way that seemed worlds apart from the boys at school. Mark, for his part, knew he was crossing dangerous territory. At first, he justified the small gestures, telling himself they were meaningless. A casual comment, a brief touch on the shoulder, a private smile when no one else was looking. But the line kept moving, and soon the secrecy became intoxicating. He knew the risk, but the thrill of being desired and the power he felt over Samantha began to outweigh caution. It was a game neither of them admitted they were playing, yet both continued to feed it. The first time something truly inappropriate happened, Samantha felt a rush of excitement and guilt mixed together. She knew what they were doing wasn't right, but the secrecy made it all the more addictive. Meeting when her father wasn't home, sneaking glances at family events, and exchanging messages that no one else was supposed to see became their routine. Every hidden interaction felt like a stolen moment from a world that didn't belong to them. Samantha convinced herself it was love, while Mark convinced himself it was under control. Neither of them realized just how unstable it all was. Her moods began to shift in ways her family couldn't quite understand. She grew more distant, locked away in her room, distracted during meals, and less interested in spending time with friends her own age. At school, her grades began to slip. Teachers noticed, but she brushed it off as stress. Her mother asked questions, but Samantha found ways to dodge them. Her father never imagined that the man he called his closest friend could have anything to do with it. That blind trust was the perfect cover for what was happening. Mark became bolder as the weeks went by. He found ways to isolate her, to draw her deeper into his influence. He convinced her that no one else would understand, that their connection was unique, and that telling anyone would destroy both of their lives. For a 17-year-old, the pressure was overwhelming, but she clung to the idea that what they had was real. She wanted to believe she was special, that she had a love worth keeping secret. But the truth was darker. Mark wasn't thinking about her future, only about his own desires and how far he could push without being caught. The longer it went on, the harder it became to hide. Samantha's mother noticed her daughter was often on edge after Mark visited. Once, she saw Samantha rush to put her phone away as soon as she walked into the room. Doubt crept into her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to voice the suspicion. It seemed too outrageous, too unthinkable. She reassured herself that Samantha was simply growing up, and that privacy and secrets were normal at her age. Mark, meanwhile, started to feel a different kind of tension. For all his confidence, there was a growing sense of danger in what he was doing. He knew that a single mistake could expose everything. A wrong word overheard, a message discovered, a glance noticed by the wrong person, any of it could unravel the life he had carefully built. Yet instead of pulling away, he tightened his grip. He told himself he was in control, that Samantha was devoted to him, and that as long as she stayed quiet, nothing bad would happen. That illusion of control kept him going, even as the walls around them began to close in. Samantha herself started to feel the weight of it. The thrill of secrecy was slowly replaced by fear. What if her mother found out? What if her father discovered the truth? What if Mark changed his mind and left her humiliated and alone? She wanted to believe in his promises, but doubts kept creeping in. Still, she couldn't walk away. Every time she thought about ending it, Mark found a way to pull her back, reassuring her, manipulating her, reminding her of how much was at stake if the truth came out. The affair had become a dangerous spiral, with both of them trapped inside. For Samantha, it was a mixture of love, fear, and dependency. For Mark, it was power, control, and obsession. They both thought they were hiding it well, but secrets have a way of surfacing when least expected. And in this case, the secret was far too explosive to remain buried for long. The cracks in their secret world were already forming. Samantha didn't know it yet, but one careless mistake, one suspicious look, or one unexpected discovery would soon shatter everything. What began as a thrilling escape would turn into something much darker, setting in motion a chain of events that neither she nor Mark could ever undo. The secret relationship between Samantha and Mark grew bolder as time passed, but with every new step they took, the risk became heavier. At first, their stolen moments were short and cautious, almost harmless on the surface, but as weeks turned into months, they found themselves trapped in something that no longer felt like a game. It was dangerous, addictive, and always at risk of collapsing in an instant. Mark began insisting they meet outside the house. He suggested quiet parks, dim corners of parking lots, and stretches of road where no one went at night. Samantha, naive and infatuated, went along with it. She told herself it was proof of how much he cared, that he was willing to take risks just to see her. But underneath that surface was a man who was no longer just indulging in a forbidden attraction. He was becoming consumed by it. The first signs of obsession showed themselves in the way Mark monitored her time. He started asking where she was, who she was with, and why she hadn't answered his calls quickly enough. At first, Samantha brushed it off as concern, maybe even as a kind of love she had never experienced before. But soon, his questions became demands. If she went out with her friends, he grew agitated. If she didn't answer him late at night, he left her long strings of missed calls. His need for control was wrapping tighter around her with every passing day. Samantha's life at home started to show the cracks. She stopped laughing the way she used to, her eyes often fixed on her phone instead of her family. Her mother noticed her mood swings and sharp temper. Even the smallest questions sparked defensiveness. At school, teachers saw her drifting away from her studies, sometimes staring blankly into space, other times rushing to check her phone during breaks. Friends who once felt close to her began to drift away too, unsure of why Samantha seemed so distracted and unreachable. Mark didn't care about those changes. In fact, he encouraged them. Isolation worked in his favor. The fewer people Samantha leaned on, the more she leaned on him. He told her repeatedly that no one else would understand what they had, that everyone else would judge them harshly and tear them apart if they knew. For Samantha, those words created a bubble. She began to live in two separate worlds, the one her family thought she lived in, and the hidden one she shared with Mark. But bubbles eventually burst. One night, Samantha missed a family dinner, claiming she had extra homework. In reality, she was with Mark, sitting in his car parked behind a row of shuttered shops. He told her how terrified he was of losing her, how much he needed her, and how she was the only person who truly understood him. For a teenager, those words were powerful, convincing, and suffocating all at once. She told herself that no boy her age could ever make her feel that wanted. She clung to it, even as fear began to creep into her heart. The fear grew stronger when Mark's behavior started shifting from protective to threatening. When Samantha once ignored his call for an hour, he appeared outside her school the next day, waiting near the gates with a stern expression. He reminded her of what they risked, warned her that if she wasn't careful, their secret would be exposed. To Samantha, it felt less like a warning and more like a threat. She began to see a side of him that was darker, more dangerous, and far less romantic than she had convinced herself to believe. At home, Samantha's parents noticed more red flags. Her father commented on her slipping grades and strange behavior. He wondered why his daughter seemed so distant, why she never looked him in the eyes anymore. Her mother tried asking gentle questions, but Samantha grew defensive, snapping back or storming off to her room. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, though no one yet knew exactly what it was. Mark's desperation grew with every passing week. He worried constantly about exposure. Every time Samantha spoke to her parents, he wondered if she would slip and say too much. Every time she posted online, he feared someone would notice something strange. He started talking about plans, about ways to keep their relationship hidden forever, and about how dangerous it would be if she betrayed him. These conversations filled Samantha with unease, but she felt trapped. If she ended it, what would he do? If she stayed, how much more control would he take over her life? The once thrilling secrecy now felt suffocating. Samantha's heart no longer raced with excitement when she saw his number flash across her phone. Instead, it filled with dread. But despite the fear, she still answered, still showed up, still allowed him to dictate her time. His hold on her was too strong, his presence in her life too deeply rooted. Then came the turning point. Samantha began considering breaking it off. One night, she sat in her room and thought about her future college, independence, and a chance to live freely. The thought of being chained to Mark forever, of hiding in the shadows, no longer felt like love. It felt like a prison. She imagined telling him she couldn't do it anymore, that she wanted out. The thought scared her, but it also gave her a glimpse of hope. What she didn't realize was that Mark had already sensed her doubts. His paranoia made him hyper-aware of every slight change in her tone, every pause before she answered, every glance away when they were together. He saw the distance forming, and it filled him with rage. To him, losing Samantha meant losing control, losing the one thing he believed made his life meaningful. The possibility of her leaving wasn't just painful, it was unacceptable. The stage was set for a disaster neither of them could escape. Samantha thought she could quietly end things, but Mark was already preparing for the worst. His obsession, his fear, and his anger were building into something far more violent than Samantha could ever imagine. The secret affair that had once felt like an escape was turning into a nightmare, and she was about to learn just how dangerous Mark's desperation could become. The night Samantha's father confronted her was the moment when everything began to spiral out of control. For months, she had carefully hidden her secret life, sneaking around and lying with the ease of someone who thought she was untouchable. But all secrets have cracks, and hers finally shattered when her father noticed she hadn't come home on time. He waited for her in the living room, growing angrier with each passing hour. When she finally crept inside, thinking everyone was asleep, he was there waiting. His questions were sharp, his voice full of suspicion, and for the first time, Samantha realized she couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. She broke down, not all the way, but enough to let pieces of the truth slip through. She admitted she had been seeing someone older, someone she wasn't supposed to be with. Her father's anger turned into horror when she revealed it was Mark, his best friend, the man he trusted most. The betrayal hit him like a knife. In his eyes, his daughter had been manipulated, his family had been humiliated, and his closest friend had committed an unforgivable act. The rage inside him was unlike anything he had felt before. Samantha's confession didn't remain a private matter. Her mother overheard the confrontation, and her reaction was pure devastation. She couldn't believe the man who had sat at her table, who had been treated as family, had crossed such a line. The house was thrown into chaos, and for the first time, Samantha saw the true scope of the damage her secret had caused. What had once seemed exciting now seemed terrifying, because the walls of silence that had protected her affair with Mark were crumbling quickly. Meanwhile, word was already spreading. Small towns thrive on gossip, and whispers traveled fast. A neighbor had seen Samantha with Mark weeks earlier, sitting in his car, and now those memories resurfaced in suspicious minds. It didn't take long before others began connecting the dots. Mark, who once seemed respected and admired, was suddenly the subject of sideways glances and hushed conversations. He knew his secret was out, and the fear of exposure consumed him. Panic set in. His career, his reputation, his friendships, everything he had built was at risk. If Samantha's family went to the police, the consequences would be catastrophic. He could lose everything, even his freedom. But instead of accepting the reality and stepping back, Mark spiraled deeper into desperation. He reached out to Samantha, flooding her phone with messages and calls. He begged her to meet him, telling her it was the only way to fix what had gone wrong. At first, She ignored him. The anger of her father, the disappointment of her mother, and the suffocating guilt she carried made her want to cut ties altogether. But Mark knew how to manipulate her. He reminded her of their secret moments, their promises, their so-called love. He twisted her emotions until she felt she owed him at least one final conversation. Against her better judgment, she agreed to see him. That night, she snuck out again, driven by a mixture of fear and loyalty. She thought perhaps she could calm him down, reassure him, and put an end to the storm. She told herself that if she met him one last time, maybe he would accept the truth and disappear from her life for good. What she didn't realize was that Mark had no intention of letting go. His mind was already consumed by the thought that Samantha had betrayed him, that she had chosen her family over him, that she had destroyed the secret bond he believed made him special. They met in a secluded spot on the edge of town, away from prying eyes. It was dark and quiet, the kind of place no one would think to look. Samantha arrived nervous, already regretting her decision, while Mark arrived furious, unable to contain the storm brewing inside him. The confrontation was inevitable. He accused her of lying, of turning her father against him, of ruining his life. She tried to reason with him, but the more she spoke, the more his anger grew. To Mark, every word from her mouth was proof that she had betrayed him. The intensity of his rage frightened Samantha. For the first time, she saw him not as a man who cared for her but as someone dangerous, someone capable of things she hadn't considered before. She wanted to leave, to go home and end the nightmare, but Mark wasn't ready to let her walk away. His obsession had taken over, and all he could think about was control. Losing her felt like losing everything, and in his mind, if he couldn't have her, no one else should. Back at home, Samantha's parents realized something was wrong. They knocked on her door only to find her bed empty. Panic spread quickly. Her mother's hands shook as she dialed her phone, but Samantha didn't answer. Her father, already enraged by the betrayal, now felt a wave of dread. He knew exactly who she might have gone to see, and the thought sent him spiraling into fear. As the hours passed, Samantha's absence became undeniable. Her parents called the police, reporting her missing, their voices filled with desperation. The community that had once whispered rumors now mobilized in concern, searching, speculating, and waiting for answers. But while they searched, Samantha was already caught in Mark's tightening grip, the night turning darker with every passing minute. The truth was simple yet terrifying. Samantha thought she was walking into a conversation, but what she had actually walked into was a trap. Mark was no longer thinking rationally. He wasn't the man who once smiled at family gatherings or laughed with her father over beers. He was something far more dangerous, now cornered, exposed, and obsessed with keeping control of the only person he believed still belonged to him. That night would mark the point of no return. The fragile line between secrecy and exposure had been crossed. The affair that had begun with glances and whispers was now on the verge of exploding into something far more violent. Something that would forever stain the lives of everyone involved. Samantha could not see the full danger yet, but it was already closing in, faster than she could escape. The construction site loomed like a skeleton in the night, half-finished beams reaching into the darkness, piles of gravel and concrete scattered around like bones. It was the kind of place no one visited after sundown, silent and forgotten, hidden in plain sight. This was where Mark told Samantha to meet him, a spot far away from neighbors, cars, or curious eyes. She hesitated at first, but her guilt and fear pushed her forward. She thought that if she met him one final time, she could explain, end things cleanly, and perhaps calm the storm she had unleashed at home. What she didn't realize was that Mark had no intention of letting her walk away. When Samantha arrived, her stomach churned with unease. The air was damp, the smell of dust thick in her throat, and every sound seemed magnified in the empty space. She spotted Mark's car parked crookedly against a mound of dirt. He stepped out quickly, his movements sharp, his face tense. Gone was the charm that had once drawn her in. In its place was something hard and desperate. He paced in front of her like a man unraveling, his voice rising as he hurled accusations. To him, she was no longer the girl who adored him, she was the traitor who had destroyed everything. Samantha tried to stay calm. She explained that she hadn't meant to expose him, that she had panicked when her father confronted her, that she had only told fragments of the truth. But Mark's ears weren't open to reason. Every word sounded like betrayal. He ranted about how she had turned her family against him, how she had ruined his reputation, how she had taken the one good thing in his life and poisoned it. His words cut through the silence of the night, echoing against the steel beams, and with each sentence, Samantha's fear grew stronger. She backed away slowly, her eyes darting toward the path she had taken in. She wanted to run, but his body blocked her way. His hands shook, his breathing quickened, and for the first time, she realized she was staring at a man who had lost control completely. This wasn't love anymore. It was obsession, raw and dangerous, and it had finally reached its breaking point. Mark grabbed her arm when she tried to move past him. His grip was bruising, and the look in his eyes was wild. Samantha's heart raced, pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She begged him with her body language, pulling away, shaking her head, trying to signal that she wanted out. But Mark's thoughts were twisted. To him, she wasn't pleading for freedom, she was rejecting him, casting him aside. That rejection ignited the final spark of violence that had been simmering inside him for months. The argument turned physical in an instant. He shoved her back toward the dirt mound, her feet stumbling over loose stones. She cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the empty sight. He shouted louder, his words slurred with rage and panic. Every ounce of frustration, every ounce of fear about being exposed, every ounce of obsession he carried for her came crashing down in that moment. He struck her once, then again, his fists, fueled not by logic, but by the terror of losing everything. Samantha tried to fight back, her hands pushing, her legs kicking, but he was stronger, his anger giving him a monstrous strength. The blows landed harder, her voice grew weaker, and soon the sight was filled with the sounds of violence instead of argument. What had once been secret passion now dissolved into brutality, leaving behind nothing but horror. When it was over, the silence returned, heavier than before. Samantha's body lay motionless on the cold ground, her face pale, her hair tangled in the dust. Mark froze, staring down at what he had done. His chest heaved, sweat dripped down his face, and for a moment he tried to convince himself it wasn't real. But the evidence was right in front of him. The girl who had once whispered promises into his ear was gone, and he was the one who had taken her life. Panic surged through him again, but this time it was colder, more practical. He knew he couldn't leave her there. Someone might stumble across the body in the morning, and the trail would lead straight back to him. His mind raced, searching for a solution. He dragged her across the dirt, her limbs limp and heavy, toward a deep pit where construction workers had begun laying foundations. The gravel scraped her skin, leaving marks that would later tell investigators the truth of what had happened. Mark dumped her body into the pit, his hands trembling as he covered her with debris, tossing broken planks, rocks, and scraps of concrete over her small frame. He worked frantically, desperate to erase what had just happened. But no matter how much he buried her, he couldn't bury the reality of his crime. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Every time he took a breath, he heard the echo of her final struggle. When he was done, he stood above the pit, chest heaving, heart pounding in his throat. The silence was absolute now, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He wiped his hands on his jeans, smearing dirt and blood, and stumbled back to his car. The steering wheel felt icy under his palms as he gripped it tightly, forcing himself to think of the next step. He told himself he could hide this, that no one would find her, that the police wouldn't connect him to the crime. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had left too many threads dangling, too many witnesses to his obsession, too many signs pointing directly at him. Driving away from the site, Mark tried to rehearse the lies he would tell. He would say he hadn't seen her. He would say he was home all night. He would say she must have run away. But no matter what words he crafted in his head, his nerves betrayed him. His hands shook on the wheel, his pulse raced, and the weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a stone. Back at his house, he scrubbed his hands, changed his clothes, and tried to wash away the evidence. But the stains on his conscience couldn't be scrubbed clean. Every sound in the night startled him, every creak of the floor made him jump. He sat in silence, waiting for the knock that he knew was coming, the knock that would end the life he once had. At the construction site, the night was still and unforgiving. Samantha's body lay buried beneath rubble, her story silenced, her life stolen. The place that had been chosen for secrecy had instead become the stage for a brutal crime, one that would soon shock everyone who thought they knew Mark and devastate the family that had once trusted him as one of their own. The darkness had claimed its victim, but the truth had only just begun to stir. Secrets may be buried, but they never stay hidden forever. The silence of the construction site was temporary, and before long, the evidence of Mark's violence would come crawling back into the light, dragging him down with it. Morning came with dread in Samantha's home. Her bed was still empty, her phone silent, and the usual clatter of her presence missing. Her mother knocked softly at her door, but no answer came. Panic crept in as she opened it and found nothing but the sheets she had carefully arranged to look as if someone had been sleeping there. Her father's heart sank when he saw the empty room, and in that instant, he knew she hadn't simply stayed out late. He knew she was gone, and his mind went immediately to Mark. The betrayal from the night before was still fresh, and now fear joined the rage that had already been eating at him. The police were called within the hour. Officers arrived quickly, their questions sharp and direct. They asked when Samantha was last seen, what she had been wearing, who she might have been with. Her father's voice cracked as he admitted the unthinkable that his daughter had been involved with his best friend. The officers froze, their pens pausing on their notebooks, the weight of that revelation hanging heavy in the air. A father's confession was often enough to open the door to truth, and in this case, it immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. Neighbors joined the search, combing through backyards, parks, and empty lots. Flyers were printed and passed around, Samantha's face staring back in every corner of the small town. The community that had once gossiped now banded together in grief and determination. But as the hours turned into a full day without her return, the whispers began again, darker this time, focused entirely on Mark. His absence from the search parties, his silence in the face of growing suspicion, and his history of being close to the family all pointed in one direction. Police visited Mark's home the same day. They knocked, and when he opened the door, his appearance alone raised suspicion. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his movements jittery. They asked him when he had last seen Samantha, and his answers came too rehearsed. He insisted he hadn't spoken to her, that he hadn't been near the house, that he had been home alone the entire night. But the officers noted the inconsistencies. His timeline didn't fit, his voice trembled at the wrong moments, and his eyes darted away when pressed about details. Investigators pulled phone records next. Samantha's phone had been silent since the night before, but the trail of calls leading up to her disappearance painted a clear picture. Dozens of missed calls from Mark, messages begging her to meet him, and finally, a ping from her phone that placed her near the edge of town, not far from the abandoned construction site. The evidence was beginning to form a chain, and Mark was at the center of it. The next day, search teams shifted their efforts to the construction site. Officers in reflective vests and volunteers combed the area, calling out Samantha's name, their voices echoing against the steel beams. At first, nothing appeared unusual. The site looked as it always did, unfinished, deserted, scattered with piles of rubble. But a trained investigator's eye caught something strange: disturbed dirt near one of the pits, footprints half erased but still visible, tire tracks leading in and out that didn't match the workers' vehicles. The pit was probed, and within hours, the search ended in horror. Samantha's body was uncovered beneath debris, hidden in haste but not well enough to escape discovery. The sight froze the team in silence. A young girl's life, stolen and discarded like something meant to be forgotten, lay before them. Word spread quickly back to her family, and the grief that poured through their home was indescribable. Her mother collapsed in tears, her father's rage turned into devastation, and the community recoiled in shock. The crime was no longer rumor, it was fact, and the truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Police wasted no time. Mark was arrested at his home that evening. He barely resisted, his body limp as they placed cuffs on his wrists. Neighbors stood in the street, some shouting, some crying, all staring at the man they had once welcomed into their homes. The betrayal was total, a wound that cut through everyone who had ever trusted him. His silence as he was led away spoke louder than any denial could. Interrogation followed. At first, Mark clung to his lies. He insisted he hadn't seen Samantha, that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. But the evidence was overwhelming. His phone records placed him with her. His car tires matched the tracks at the site. Scratches on his arms hinted at a struggle, and the dirt on his shoes matched the soil from the pit. One by one, the lies crumbled. Eventually, faced with the weight of proof, his defenses broke. He admitted what he had done, though he framed it as a moment of panic, a mistake, an accident. But investigators saw the truth in the brutality of the scene. It wasn't an accident. It was rage, obsession, and deliberate violence. The trial months later was a spectacle that drew crowds from across the county. Parents clutched their children tighter as they listened to the story unfold in court. Prosecutors laid out the secret affair, the manipulation, the obsession, and finally the murder. They showed photographs from the crime scene, timelines of messages, and witness testimonies that painted Mark as a predator who had exploited trust and destroyed a family. Samantha's parents sat through every detail, their faces etched with grief, their pain laid bare for the world to see. Mark's defense tried to argue that he had lost control, that he hadn't meant for it to go so far, that it was a tragic mistake rather than cold-blooded murder. But the jury saw through it. They saw a man who had groomed a young girl, lied to his best friend, and finally killed to protect his secret. After weeks of testimony, deliberation took only hours. The verdict was guilty, on all counts. The sentence was life in prison without parole. Mark sat expressionless as it was read, his once careful mask finally shattered. The community exhaled a collective sigh of relief, though it did little to ease the grief that lingered. Samantha's family never recovered. Her mother spent her days consumed by sorrow. Her father carried the weight of betrayal that had come from the man he trusted most. Their home became quieter, emptier, haunted by the absence of their daughter. For the town, the story lived on as a chilling reminder of how danger can hide in plain sight. A trusted friend, a familiar face, had been a predator all along. The whispers never stopped. The memory never faded. At the construction site, workers eventually finished the building. But for those who knew the story, it remained a place marked by tragedy. Samantha's name was spoken often, her life remembered as a warning and a lesson. Her story spread beyond the small town, carried by news stations and documentaries, a tale of secrecy, obsession, and betrayal that ended in blood. It stood as proof that even the people closest to you can carry the darkest secrets, and that sometimes the ones trusted most are the ones to be feared. Mark's cell became his final cage, the walls closing in on him as years dragged on. There was no escape, no more manipulation, no one left to control. He lived with the reality of what he had done, a predator stripped of his power, condemned to spend the rest of his life remembering the night he destroyed everything. The grisly end of Samantha's story became etched in the memory of everyone who had known her. What had started as a dangerous secret between a schoolgirl and her father's best friend had ended in murder, a tragedy that shattered trust, ripped apart a family, and left scars that time would never heal.